Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is the fantasy movie review and I'll be having a look at the movie Dragon Lore, Curse of the Shadow, also known as Saga the Shadow Cabal and also known as Rise of the Shadow Warrior. And believe it or not, it also has some other names as well when you look at different countries. So this is a 2013 fantasy film and I believe it was originally supposed to be an adaptation of the video game Saga. And it doesn't stop with the interesting facts there. Apparently this film was actually going to be a web series initially, however that soon changed to be a kind of backdoor pilot for a potential TV show, and that was changed again to be a feature-length film which we see today. Now because of that, it does have a little bit of a major TV feel to it, but don't let that really put you off. So the first thing I'll say about this film, before I really sort of get into the plot and positives and negatives really, is that it is obviously a relatively low budget film, and I always kind of prefix a review like this by sort of saying, not judging it too harshly against, say, the higher end blockbuster fantasies like things like Lord of the Rings. Now, mentioning Lord of the Rings, this film is obviously very, very influenced by that, and it really wears it on its sleeve. Sometimes a little bit too much. You have lots of different races in this film. Things like orcs, for example, are pretty much straight from the Lord of the Rings trilogy films. But also, it's very heavily influenced by, I would say, the sort of role-playing games, is particularly things like World of Warcraft, for example. So to give you a brief, non-spoilery explanation of the plot, really it centres on three sort of hero characters. You have a human cleric, a female elf, who I suppose is probably the kind of central character to a certain degree, and an orc who sort of joins them a little bit sort of later on. And the story really is this female elf is kind of this sort of lone bounty hunter type. She's accidentally cursed with this sort of sigil, which is the sort of the mark of the Shadow Cabal, who are basically a kind of expanding evil presence, who are trying to resurrect like an evil deity. So she's cursed with this sigil, and it basically means she's kind of slowly sort of becoming evil inside, if you know what I mean. And there's all these different kind of characters that we see that kind of have this sort of sigil, and they've ultimately been almost sort of marked, if you like, to sort of serve the evil masters. Now, what they think is, although she has this mark, she only got it by accident, so she's not actually an evil person. So they want to kind of use her to kind of infiltrate the Cabal really, and see if they can sort of find out what they're up to and almost destroy it within, if possible. So what you have here is the tale of these sort of three heroes kind of sort of putting their differences aside and banding together and ultimately trying to stop the bad guys. Now, I'm not really going to go into too much in the plot other than that, obviously for fear of spoilers, but let me tell you a little bit about, you know, what I thought of the film. So as I said, the budget really can't match the scope that this film wants to have, but it does a good job of trying, I have to say. Talk about a couple of the negatives first of all. Now, in regards to the budget, it obviously does show on the screen sometimes that unfortunately this can't quite live up to it. The CGI is used fairly sparingly, to be honest with you, but it looks relatively sort of cheap when they do use it. Costumes and stuff, although some look really good, I have to say, there are some instances where it looks particularly poor. The one standout for me in regards to a negative, they fight a kind of almost like a giant ogre, and it really is just a very rubbery suit. And I actually think they do fight quite a lot of. There's not quite a lot of fighting in this film. They're better off having just cut that section out of the film because it looks really bad. It's noticeably a crappy suit, and it just looks like a guy in a very sort of wobbly, sort of polystyrene rubber suit, if you know, sort of flailing around. There are some sort of minor things. The main elf character has kind of got these bright blue sort of eyes, and they're very obviously contact lenses. I can sort of forgive that, to be honest with you, because it's one of those things where the budget simply can't do any CGI on the eyes and make the iris move and things like that. But yeah, again, just some things like more technical details. I didn't think the sound mixing was particularly fantastic, I have to say. Sometimes I found it a little bit hard to maybe understand what was said. Especially, I have to sort in the same breath as that, I will also talk about the male cleric character, who has kind of a fairly thick accent, and he kind of mumbles as well sometimes, so it's kind of difficult to understand what he's saying a lot of the time. He kind of improves as the film goes on, I have to say, But I said the first half of the film, I kind of was funny. I really had to listen hard to what he was saying. Not to mention sometimes it's, as I say, where maybe the sound mixing isn't fantastic. It doesn't help with that either. The acting is kind of a bit of a mixed bag, I have to say. The main cast, I would say, generally fairly good. However, some of the supporting cast, there's a kind of a female magic user, that's what I go in to say, who kind of is on the sort of the forces of good. Very wooden acting from her, I have to say. You know, it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest with you. There's not bad acting for this kind of film, but some of it is a little bit choppy, I have to be honest with you. Now, most of this stuff, there are some sort of more, as I say, some technical issues that I have with it. How critical I'm going to be with that? Like I said, this is a relatively low budget film, so I can't really judge it too harshly on, you know, on stuff like that. You've just got to kind of be aware that it's there. Now, in regards to the actual story itself, I actually thought it was a relatively intelligent story for these sort of fantasy films. It potentially was a little bit predictable, or maybe the characters were kind of a little bit cliche, but to be fair, a low budget fantasy film, not bad, I've got to say. The positives of this film, it does a lot with what it has. I think sometimes that the cinematography is pretty damn good for this kind of like budget of film. There's some fantastic, you know, views of scenery and some really good camera work, I've got to be honest with you as well. Choreography as well, I thought was really good. There's some very inventive fight scenes, and for the most part they look pretty decent, especially from the female elf. Now, I'm not sure if she did her own stunts. It kind of looks like it might well be. I don't actually know that for sure. Nevertheless, it was very well shot and very exciting to look at. There are a couple of instances where I didn't think the fighting may have been particularly good, but for the most part, 90% of it, I thought that the fighting, the choreography looked really good. I really liked the costume designs as well. I thought, again, for the budget, they had a really great visual style. I think the female elf, she looked really good. She, these very sort of striking contacts, lots of sort of dark makeup in the ears, really good. I thought that the orcs looked good. They kind of have a little bit more of a kind of feline look to them, I have to say. But they are very good. I mean, the orcs especially are very, very influenced by the kind of Lord of the Rings, their armour and the kind of slow-mo when they're sort of running, things like that. The actual story is quite engaging, and you do get a sort of a good sense of these characters sort of building their relationships as they go along. And at the end of the film, you're really bought into this group of these three characters. You know, and their kind of relationship between the three of them does seem quite organic and genuine. You know, and you kind of buy into them. You know, at first they were kind of seemed quite cliche. At the end of it, you know, you want to see more of them. Is what I'm getting at here. One other quick negative I have to say, the actual end set piece I thought was fairly weak. I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to spoil it, but the actual action that actually happens, I would say, is maybe over a little bit too quickly and a little bit easy, I have to say. You know, it's difficult to really say without going into too many spoilers. Hopefully, if you watch the film, you kind of maybe try and get what I'm saying, but kind of look around their sort of peripheral people and see what they're sort of doing, and you'll kind of get my meaning there. But overall, I really enjoyed this film. And I have to say, if this was a pilot for a TV show, it would make me want to watch the show. You know, at least give it a try. As a film, yeah, I think I'll probably watch it again as well. I enjoyed it to the point where, yeah, I thought it was a decent enough film to watch again. Had a good visual style. Although it took me a while to maybe warm to the character, I actually thought at the end of the film I kind of really I enjoyed them. My favourite character, I have to say, was the orc. I thought he was good. But I like the visual style of all three of the main characters, and it has, it's got lots of different sort of creatures in there. We do see some dragons and stuff like that, but they're very sort of sparingly, to be honest with you. But you've got you've got undead, you've got orcs, you've got mermaids, you've got all sorts of stuff in here. So it does it does a fair while of really sort of showing you this world for the budget that it's had. My hat's off to the makers of this film for trying to give such a kind of rich environment for obviously the low budget that they had, and I would definitely like to see more of them. So I'm going to give this film a 7 out of 10. Now, for a low budget film, and if you're a fantasy fan, I think you should check it out, because this is certainly one of the better efforts, I would say. It's by no means perfect, and it does have some flaws of it, as I've mentioned. But I think if you're a fan of these films, you should check it out, and it'd be very interesting to see you know, if the guys who made this film, what they could do with maybe a bit of a better budget. There you go. So 7 out of 10, enjoyed it. Go check it out. Let me know what you think. Bye for now.